The early life of Prophet Muhammad. The story of Prophet Muhammad begins long before his birth, with the noble lineage that connected him to the Prophet Ibrahim through his son Ismail. Muhammad belonged to the tribe of Quraysh, a respected tribe in Mecca, known for its guardianship of the Kaaba and its role in trade and leadership. His family was from the clan of Banu Hashim, which held honor among Quraysh, though it was not the wealthiest. His father was Abdullah ibn Abd al-Muttalib, and his mother was Amina bint Wahb. Both came from noble families that were respected in Arabia. Before the birth of Muhammad, Abdullah, his father, passed away while returning from a trade journey. This meant that Muhammad would be born an orphan, a test that shaped his life from the very beginning. His mother Amina was a gentlewoman from the clan of Zurah. She carried him with hope and prayer, and his birth was marked by signs that were remembered by many in Mecca. Muhammad was born in the year 570, the year of the elephant. This was the year when an army led by Abraha, the ruler of Yemen, tried to attack Mecca and destroy the Kaaba with war elephants. Their mission failed, as Allah protected the sacred house. This event gave the people of Mecca a strong reminder of the holiness of the Kaaba and the protection of God over it. The birth of Muhammad in the same year was seen as a great blessing for the Quraysh. His grandfather Abd al-Muttalib was overjoyed at his birth. He named the child Muhammad, which was a unique name at that time in Arabia. It meant the praised one. People wondered why he chose such a name, and he explained that he wished his grandson to be praised both on earth and in heaven, as was the custom of the Arabs. Muhammad was given to a wet nurse so he could grow up strong in the desert climate, away from the crowded city of Mecca. His foster mother was Halima al-Sa'diyah from the tribe of Banu Sa'd. She and her family were poor when she first took him, but after Muhammad came into their care, blessings entered their household. Their animals became healthier and their lives improved. Halima loved Muhammad dearly and kept him in her care longer than usual because she saw the signs of greatness in him. When Muhammad was about 4 years old, an event occurred that Halima never forgot. While playing with other children, the angel Jibril came to him, opened his chest, and took out his heart. He washed it with pure water and returned it. This left a mark on his body but caused him no harm. The children who saw it were shocked, and Halima, frightened for his safety, decided to return him to his mother in Mecca. Muhammad lived with his mother Amina until the age of 6. She loved him dearly, but her health was fragile. When she took him to visit the grave of his father in Yathrib, now known as Medina, she fell ill on the journey back and passed away at a place called Abwa. Once again, Muhammad became an orphan, now without both mother and father. After her death, his grandfather Abd al-Muttalib took him into his care. He treated the young boy with love and respect, even making him sit beside him on his mat, a place usually reserved for the elders. But when Muhammad was only 8 years old, his grandfather also passed away. Before his death, Abd al-Muttalib entrusted him to his uncle Abu Talib, who would become his guardian and protector for many years to come. Abu Talib was not wealthy, but he cared deeply for Muhammad. He treated him like his own son and took him along on trade journeys. On one of these journeys to Syria, when Muhammad was about 12, a Christian monk named Bahira noticed something unusual about the boy. He saw signs of prophethood in him and advised Abu Talib to protect him from harm, especially from those who might be jealous or fearful of his future. As Muhammad grew into his youth, he became known for his honesty, trustworthiness, and gentle character. He worked as a shepherd, tending sheep for the people of Mecca. This was a humble job, but it gave him time for reflection and patience. Later he worked in trade, and because of his honesty, people began to call him Al-Amin, meaning the trustworthy. His reputation spread across Mecca as someone who never lied, never cheated, and always dealt fairly. By the time Muhammad reached his 20s, he had already built a name for himself as a man of integrity. His uncle Abu Talib often struggled financially, so Muhammad worked hard to support his household. During this time, He was hired by Khadijah, a wealthy merchant woman of great honor in Mecca, to manage her trade caravans. She soon noticed his honesty, his skills, and his noble manners, and she grew to respect and admire him deeply. When Muhammad returned from a successful trade journey for Khadijah, she was impressed by his character and truthfulness. Through a trusted friend, she expressed her interest in marriage. Muhammad, though humble, accepted, and at the age of 25 he married Khadijah, who was 15 years older than him. Their marriage was filled with love, respect, and loyalty. Khadijah became not only his wife, but also his strongest supporter in the years to come. Together, they built a happy family life. They had children, and Muhammad continued to live with dignity and honesty. Even before receiving revelation, he disliked the false practices of the people of Mecca, such as idol worship, drinking, and injustice. He often spent time in reflection and prayer, especially in the cave of Hira outside Mecca, where he sought closeness to God. By this time, Muhammad had become one of the most respected men in Mecca. When the Kaaba was rebuilt after being damaged by floods, a dispute broke out among the tribes over who should place the sacred black stone back in its place. To avoid bloodshed, they agreed to let the first man who entered the Kaaba decide. That man was Muhammad. The leaders trusted his wisdom. Muhammad placed the stone on a cloth and asked the chiefs of each tribe to hold the edges together. Then he himself lifted it into place. This wise solution pleased everyone and added to his reputation as a man of fairness and peace. As he entered his mid-30s, Muhammad's heart longed for truth and guidance beyond the corrupt practices of his society. He often withdrew from the noise of Mecca to spend nights in meditation and prayer in the cave of Hira. It was here that the greatest moment of his life would soon take place, when he would receive the first revelation and the beginning of his mission as the final messenger of God. The beginning of revelation and the early years in Mecca's. Prophet Muhammad approached the age of 40. His heart was restless in search of truth. He had lived a life of honesty, trustworthiness, and moral purity, but he disliked the corruption, idol worship, and injustice that surrounded him in Mecca. The city was filled with idols inside the Kaaba, each tribe claiming their own god, and people engaged in practices such as burying daughters alive, exploiting the poor, and oppressing the weak. Muhammad often withdrew to the cave of Hira, a quiet place in the mountains near Mecca, where he would spend nights in meditation, prayer, and reflection. It was during one of these nights in the month of Ramadan that the turning point of his life came. While in deep reflection in the cave, an angel appeared before him. This was the angel Jibril, who came with a command from Allah. Jibril embraced him and said, "Recite." Muhammad, who could not read or write, replied that he was not one who could recite. The angel embraced him again and repeated the command, "Recite." A third time, Jibril embraced him and said, "Recite in the name of your Lord who created man from a clot of blood. Recite, for your Lord is most generous, who taught by the pen, taught man what he did not know." These were the first verses of the Holy Quran. Muhammad was shaken by this experience. He hurried back home, trembling, and asked his wife Khadijah to cover him with a blanket. She comforted him with words of reassurance, reminding him that he was a man who cared for his family, supported the poor, and upheld honesty, and that God would never abandon him. Khadijah took him to her cousin Waraka ibn Nawfal, a learned Christian who had studied the earlier scriptures. When Muhammad explained what had happened, Waraka confirmed that the angel who came to him was the same angel who had come to Moses, and he foretold that Muhammad had been chosen as a prophet. He also warned him that his people would oppose him and drive him out, but that he was indeed chosen for a great mission. For some time after this first revelation, there was a pause. Muhammad continued to reflect, uncertain of what would come next. Then one day, while he was walking, the angel Jibril appeared to him again, filling the horizon, and declared that he was the messenger of Allah. This confirmed his mission and gave him the strength to begin his work. At first, Muhammad preached in secret. He shared the message of Islam with those closest to him. The first to accept Islam was his wife Khadijah, who supported him with her wealth and devotion. His cousin Ali, who was still a young boy living in his household, also accepted the message. His close friend Abu Bakr was among the earliest believers, along with Zayd ibn Haritha, who was like an adopted son to him. These first Muslims prayed with him and learned from him in private gatherings. Through Abu Bakr, several other noble men and women accepted Islam, including Uthman ibn Affan, Abdurrahman ibn Auf, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, and Talha ibn Ubaidullah. Slowly, the message began to spread among those who were searching for truth. After 3 years of private preaching, Muhammad received the command to call people openly. He climbed Mount Safa in Mecca and called out to the Quraysh tribes. When they gathered, he asked them, "If I told you that an army was approaching to attack you, would you believe me?" They replied that they trusted him, for he had never lied. Then he told them that he had been sent as a warner to call them to worship one God and abandon their idols. At this, many of the leaders became angry, for his words threatened their traditions and their position as keepers of the idols in the Kaaba. From that moment, opposition grew stronger. Some mocked him, calling him a poet or a magician. Others spread lies about him to discredit his message. The leaders of Quraysh feared that if people followed Muhammad, their power, wealth, and trade would be lost. They tried to stop him through persuasion, offering him wealth, power, or marriage in exchange for abandoning his call, but he refused, saying that if they placed the sun in his right hand and the moon in his left, he would never abandon the message of God. As the years passed, the followers of Islam increased, though they remained a minority. The Quraysh responded with harsh persecution. Poor Muslims, such as Bilal, a slave from Abyssinia, were tortured for declaring faith in one God. He was dragged on the hot sands and beaten, but he refused to renounce his faith, repeating only the word one. When another family, Yasir and Sumaya, along with their son Ammar, suffered greatly. Sumaya became the first martyr in Islam when she was killed for her faith. Despite the suffering, the Prophet continued to preach with patience and wisdom. He reminded his followers that paradise awaited those who endured with faith. To ease their hardships, he advised some of the Muslims to migrate to Abyssinia, where a Christian king, the Negus, ruled with justice. There they found safety and were welcomed by the king, who, after hearing their explanation of Islam and the recitation of verses about Jesus and Mary, allowed them to stay in peace. The Quraysh grew frustrated at the spread of Islam and decided to boycott the Prophet, his family, and his followers. They forced them into a valley known as Shib Abi Talib, cutting them off from trade, food, and marriage. For 3 years, the Muslims suffered hunger and hardship, surviving on leaves and little food. Children cried from hunger, and the situation was extremely difficult, but they remained steadfast in their faith. Eventually, the boycott ended when some fair-minded individuals in Mecca opposed its cruelty and tore up the agreement. The years that followed brought both sorrow and hope. In what became known as the Year of Sorrow, the Prophet lost his beloved wife Khadijah, who had been his strongest supporter, and his uncle Abu Talib, who had protected him from the Quraysh. Their deaths left him deeply grieved and more vulnerable to his enemies. Seeking a place where his message could be accepted, he traveled to the city of Taif, but instead of welcoming him, the people mocked him and drove him out with stones, causing him great pain. Yet even in that moment of hardship, he prayed for their guidance rather than cursing them. After these trials, Allah blessed him with a miraculous journey known as Isra and Miraj. One night he was taken from the Kaaba in Mecca to Jerusalem, where he led the earlier prophets in prayer. From there, he was raised to the heavens, where he witnessed the wonders of creation, met previous prophets, and was shown paradise and hell. It was during this journey that the 5 daily prayers were made obligatory for Muslims. This journey strengthened him and gave hope to his followers, reminding them of the greatness of Allah and the truth of the message. Meanwhile, in Mecca, the situation grew more difficult. But a new chapter was about to begin. During the pilgrimage season, people from Yathrib, a city north of Mecca, heard the Prophet's message and accepted Islam. They invited him to come to their city as a leader and peacemaker, for their tribes had long been divided and at war. They pledged to support him and protect him if he came to them. This was the beginning of the Hijrah, the migration, which would change the course of history and mark the next stage of the Prophet's mission. The Hijrah to Medina and the building of the Muslim Ummah. When the Prophet received the pledge of support from the people of Yathrib, it marked the beginning of a new chapter for Islam. The Muslims in Mecca had endured years of hardship, persecution, and loss. Now they had an opportunity for safety and growth in a new land. The Prophet gave his followers permission to migrate gradually to Yathrib, which later became known as Medina, the city of the Prophet. One by one, groups of Muslims left Mecca quietly and made the journey north. The Quraysh leaders in Mecca, however, realized the danger of Muhammad finding a safe place from where his message could spread. They plotted to kill him before he could escape. Their plan was to gather men from each clan so that the responsibility of his blood would be shared, preventing the Banu Hashim from taking revenge. But Allah informed the Prophet of their plan. On the night chosen for the assassination, he asked his cousin Ali to sleep in his bed while he slipped away unseen. The assassins surrounded the house, thinking Muhammad was still inside, but when morning came, they discovered Ali in his place and realized that the Prophet had already departed. The Prophet set out on the Hijrah with his loyal companion Abu Bakr. They took refuge for several days in the cave of Thar, hiding from the Quraysh search parties. At one point, their enemies came so close that Abu Bakr feared they would be discovered. But the Prophet reassured him with words that Allah was with them. A spider spun a web across the entrance of the cave, and a pigeon built its nest there, making it appear untouched. The Quraysh passed by without entering, and the Prophet and Abu Bakr continued their journey safely. When they finally reached Medina, the Muslims welcomed them with joy. They sang words of happiness, greeting the messenger who had come to bring them peace and unity. The Prophet's arrival transformed the city. The people of Medina, who had long suffered from rivalry between the tribes of Abiyus and Khazraj, now had a leader who brought them together. One of the first acts of the Prophet in Medina was to build a mosque. The mosque of the Prophet became not only a place of prayer, but also the center of the community. It was where the Muslims gathered for worship, discussions, and decisions. The Prophet himself joined in the work of building, carrying stones alongside his companions. The mosque symbolized unity, humility, and devotion to Allah. Another important step was to establish brotherhood between the emigrants from Mecca, known as Muhajirun, and the natives of Medina, known as Ansar. The Prophet paired them together as brothers, ensuring that the newcomers were supported, and that the bonds of love and faith grew strong. This system of brotherhood created a solid foundation for the growing Muslim community. The Prophet also drafted an agreement known as the Constitution of Medina. This document laid out the rights and responsibilities of all citizens, including Muslims, Jews, and other groups in the city. It guaranteed religious freedom and established the Prophet as the leader and arbiter. It was one of the first written constitutions in history, ensuring justice and harmony among diverse communities. Despite this progress, the Quraysh in Mecca were not ready to let Islam grow in peace. They continued to see Muhammad as a threat and prepared for conflict. The first major battle came at Badr in the second year after the Hijrah. The Muslims, numbering only about 300, faced a much larger Quraysh army of nearly 1,000. The Muslims were poorly equipped, yet they fought with faith and courage. The Prophet raised his hands in prayer, asking Allah for victory. Against all odds, the Muslims triumphed, and the Quraysh suffered a heavy defeat. The Battle of Badr became a symbol of divine support for the believers. However, the Quraysh soon sought revenge. The following year, they gathered a larger force and marched toward Medina, leading to the Battle of Uhud. The Prophet and his companions prepared to defend the city. At first, the Muslims gained the upper hand, but some archers disobeyed the Prophet's command and left their positions to collect spoils. This mistake allowed the Quraysh cavalry, led by Khalid ibn al-Walid, to strike from behind. The Muslims suffered heavy losses, and the Prophet himself was injured. His beloved uncle Hamza, the Lion of Islam, was martyred in that battle. Though it was a painful day, the Muslims learned lessons of discipline and obedience. 2 years later, the Quraysh once again united with other tribes to try to crush the Muslims in Medina. They brought a large force and laid siege to the city. In response, the Muslims dug a trench around Medina, an idea suggested by Salman the Persian. The trench made it impossible for the enemy cavalry to penetrate. For weeks, the Quraysh camped outside, but they could not break through. Eventually, the siege collapsed, and the Quraysh withdrew in frustration. This event, known as the Battle of the Trench, marked a turning point as the Quraysh realized they could not easily defeat the Muslims. During these years in Medina, the Prophet also continued to teach and guide his followers. He emphasized worship, charity, justice, and compassion. He taught that faith was not only belief in the heart, but also action in daily life. He cared for the poor, visited the sick, and treated everyone with kindness. He resolved disputes, taught forgiveness, and reminded his companions to seek the pleasure of Allah in all that they did. One of the most remarkable qualities of the Prophet during this period was his patience and trust in Allah despite hardships. He faced betrayal from some groups in Medina who broke their agreements, and he endured plots from enemies within and outside the city. Yet he never abandoned his mission of spreading truth and justice. In the 6th year after the Hijrah, the Prophet and his companions set out to perform Umrah, the minor pilgrimage to the Kaaba in Mecca. The Quraysh, however, prevented them from entering. After negotiations, a treaty was signed at Hudaybiyah. Though the terms seemed unfavorable to the Muslims, the Prophet accepted them, showing wisdom and patience. The treaty allowed peace between the Muslims and Quraysh for 10 years. This time of peace gave Islam the chance to spread widely, as more people heard the message without fear of war. During this period, the Prophet also sent letters to rulers beyond Arabia, inviting them to Islam. These letters were sent to the Byzantine emperor, the Persian king, and other leaders. Some responded with respect, while others rejected the message. But it showed the Prophet's vision of Islam as a universal message for all of humanity. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah also led to one of the greatest victories for the Muslims. Not on the battlefield, but in numbers of people entering Islam. Many who had once been hesitant now embraced the faith. Seeing the Prophet's patience, wisdom, and truthfulness, the stage was now set for the final years of the Prophet's mission, in which Mecca itself would be open to Islam, and the message of the Quran would spread across Arabia. The conquest of Mecca and the final years after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, Islam spread more quickly than ever before. People from across Arabia came to Medina to learn about the new faith, and many tribes embraced Islam. The Prophet's message of worshipping one God, practicing justice and showing mercy was reaching more and more hearts. 2 years after the treaty, the Quraysh broke the agreement by attacking an allied tribe of the Muslims. This violation gave the Prophet the right to respond. He gathered an army of 10,000 believers and marched toward Mecca. When the Quraysh saw the strength of the Muslims, many of them realized that resistance was hopeless. Abu Sufyan, one of the leaders of Quraysh who had opposed the Prophet for years, came to negotiate. The Prophet granted him safety and announced that anyone who entered Abu Sufyan's house or remained in their own homes or entered the Kaaba would be safe. The Muslims entered Mecca peacefully. There was no bloodshed, no revenge, and no destruction. The Prophet rode humbly, his head bowed in gratitude to Allah. When he reached the Kaaba, he entered and cleansed it of the idols, reciting verses from the Quran that truth has come and falsehood has vanished. The Kaaba was restored as the house of Allah, built by Ibrahim and Ismail for the worship of one God. Then the Prophet addressed the people of Mecca. These were the same people who had mocked him, opposed him, and forced him into exile. He asked them what they expected from him. They replied that he was a noble brother and the son of a noble brother. The Prophet forgave them all, declaring that they were free. This act of mercy and forgiveness won the hearts of many, and Mecca became the center of Islam. After the conquest of Mecca, the Prophet continued to spread Islam throughout Arabia. Tribes from all regions came to pledge allegiance to him. Within a short time, most of the Arabian Peninsula accepted Islam. The Prophet sent teachers and governors to different regions to guide people in faith and justice. In the 10th year after the Hijrah, the Prophet performed his only Hajj after the migration, known as the farewell pilgrimage. More than 100,000 Muslims gathered with him to perform the rites. On the plain of Arafat, he delivered his famous sermon, reminding the believers of their duties. He declared that the life and property of every Muslim was sacred, that there was no superiority of an Arab over a non-Arab or a non-Arab over an Arab, nor of a white over a black or a black over a white, except in piety and good deeds. He emphasized the rights of women, the importance of justice, and the unity of the Muslim community. He told them to hold firmly to the Quran and his teachings, assuring that if they did so, they would never go astray. During this sermon, the verse was revealed, "Today I have perfected your religion for you, completed my favor upon you, and chosen Islam as your religion." The believers wept with joy at the completion of their faith. Soon after returning to Medina, the Prophet fell ill. His sickness grew more severe with time. Even in his illness, he continued to remind his followers about prayer and about treating others with kindness. In his final days, he was cared for in the house of his wife Aisha. One morning, he lifted the curtain of his room to look at the Muslims praying in the mosque and smiled, seeing them standing together in worship. It was the last time they saw him alive. On the 12th of Rabi al-Awwal, in the 11th year after the Hijrah, the Prophet Muhammad, the Messenger of Allah, passed away at the age of 63. The news of his death was so painful that many companions could not believe it. Umar ibn al-Khattab declared in grief that anyone who said Muhammad had died would face his sword. But Abu Bakr, with calm faith, reminded everyone with the words that whoever worshipped Muhammad should know that Muhammad has died. But whoever worships Allah, Allah is ever living and never dies. The companions buried him in the room of Aisha, which was beside the mosque. His death was the greatest sorrow for the Muslims, yet his message and legacy continued to guide them. The Prophet left behind no wealth, no palace, and no worldly treasures. What he left was the Quran, his teachings, and a community of believers united in faith. His life was an example of honesty, mercy, patience, courage, and devotion to Allah. From his early years as an orphan to his mission as the final prophet, every stage of his life carried lessons for humanity. His legacy spread far beyond Arabia. Within a few decades after his passing, Islam reached lands across Asia, Africa, and Europe. His words and actions continue to guide more than 1 billion people around the world. He remains the most praised and remembered man in history, just as his grandfather named him Muhammad, the praised one. The full story of Prophet Muhammad is not only the biography of one man, but also the history of how truth, justice, and mercy can transform the world. His life stands as a light for all generations, calling people to worship one God and to live with compassion and integrity.